Today we have distinguished speakers panel. So we have Ukrainian experts and international experts. And this topic, as I understand, has been discussed several times already in Ukraine. And IMCU is aiming to publish recommendatory explanations by the 15th of September 2015, so quite soon. So today's event, I would say, is kind of a final touch where Ukrainian and international experts can come up with suggestions how to improve, adjust, and what will be the final text. Today we have several presentations in session one. The first speaker will be first Deputy Chair of the Ukrainian Anti-Monopoly Committee, Maria Nizhnik.
Then if you allow me, I will speak in the Ukrainian. I'm thankful to you very much for the enthusiasm that you have made us provided for the support of holding this event. I'm thankful to the Foundation for the development of the competition for the organizing of this event. I'm thankful to the experts who have answered the invitations to take part and to give their recommendations on this very acute topic. First and foremost, I say about the topic of transparency and the methodology of calculating fines and probably more technical topic, publication of the resolution of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. I may say that the policy of the MCU, of the new composition of the MCU, is transparency in our activities, in our resolutions, and it's a key principle of our activities. So therefore, actually, we are not waiting for passing just on a legislative level, just mandatory requirements on how to calculate fines. We have started the process of the detail specification and publicity in our approaches. Somehow just in the middle of the last July, the drafts of the explanatory explanations was published on our website. Within actually a recent a month and a half, we were gathering comments. Last Monday, we had a roundtable attended by representatives of the law firms to discuss an intermediary, just to have a intermediary discussion of our standpoints and key just remarks. At the moment, based on the result of the work of that roundtable, will devise already the final version of their explanatory comments, which we plan next week, within next 10 days, to approve as a working document. As we see, in recent 2-3 weeks, we were trying to start the practical application of those approaches that have been shaped in these recommendatory explanations. And Mrs. Maria will provide information on our sort of English findings, the experience of applying the methodology, and key problematic issues which we see. Of course, if we say about, there is one question, that's the percentage point rates, which should be taken into account while calculating the basic rate of the fine. But a more acute or more complicated theoretical question is how to define the circulation or the turnover which of relevant market related to infringements in the market. We see that in our practice there are too many issues that are actually in there are just micro questions, micro issues. Among the general number of cases on violations in abusing the monopoly situations, there are both major claims. Claims on big violations from big monopoly companies, as well as complaints from physical persons on some just minor issues, very minor issues, and accordingly to specify the relevant market, to specify the proceeds from the proceeds that are based on this reduce the cost of maybe 1,000 or 10,000 hryvnias. It's rather complicated thing, rather complicated exercise, and we understand and see it so far. Of course, there are questions which we have touched during the previous roundtable with the representatives of the Ukrainian law firms. Mainly, one of the discussions was turning around whether there should be some particular percentage points on the price or the cost list to the aggravating or to the softening circumstances. We have accepted the arguments provided to us. Therefore, I will be more thankful if within this roundtable we would focus be more on these, so to say, more complicated issues. These are the issues of defining the relevant market or the turnover related directly or indirectly with violations both to competitive and to abuse of the monopoly situations. That's not to take their time. I'll give the floor to Maria. Maria, you're welcome. Dear colleagues, thank you so much for the invitation, because I did consider this issue is very important, and I hope that we'll have today a very interesting and useful discussion. And based on the results of the discussion, we indeed will have an opportunity to pass a document that will be a transparent one, that will ensure the legal provisions, will ensure just indiscriminate of nature and provide explanations how the committee will apply this recommendatory explanation, what sizes of fines will be applied on economic agents. As for the presentation, I would like to divide the presentation in 3 key directions. First, to point out key provisions on which recommendatory explanations are based, on which the determination of fines are planned will be while protecting the competitive environment. And then to give indeed just actual examples on violation and what fines were applied on results of the case, and what terrible sanctions would have applied if we would apply the recommendatory explanations and principles that are used in these explanatory explanations. And third, to focus on those issues on which already the head of the Anti-Monopoly Committee said, which have been confronted by the committee while applying these explanatory explanations. As for key provisions, at the moment, the methodology itself of applying fines provides the so-called not two-level or three-level system of defining fines. At the first level, it is necessary to determine the basic size of the fine, and then does take into account the aggravating circumstance. And the third level, the fine itself is specified as on the maximal size of this fine, which is provided in the Article 54 of the law. That's 10% of the common turnover of the economic units, and the impact of the fine of the competitiveness of the economic agents. That is the objective of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, and the objective imposed cannot be just to restrict competition. And if the fine is too huge, too enormous, it doesn't mean that the market player will be destroyed. And applying of the fines only, so there's opportunity to increase the fine. If, for example, a curbing effect or just the seriousness of the violation have been specified while defining the basic rate of the fine. As for the basic rate of the fine, at the moment, the basic rate of the fine, in the wording of that draft that has been sent 3 months ago, that has been disclosed 3 months ago, and now has been discussed, the basic size of the fine is specified with a view of the economic size of the aggravation, the seriousness of the violation, and direct curbing effect, in order to just remove the negative effects. with an objective of curbing the violation and preventing thwarting of the violation, which is the key objective in this case. That the economic scale of the violation can be specified by way of three key components. This is if we speak about a buyer, that is, there should be the level of the costs on acquisition of the commodities directly linked to the, if we speak about the seller, directly of the size of the proceeds of the seller from the sales of the commodities and services related to the money. You should take into account the duration, the length of the violation, and accordingly the territory in which this violation took place. As for the just take into account the seriousness of the violation, one should point out that based on the findings of international experts as well as Ukrainian experts, and based on the data that the Anti-Monopoly Committee has, the seriousness of the violation is considered as the percentage point of the proceeds of the the result of which the increase or decrease of the price has been made, and it's this the buyer or the seller. Therefore, take into account the empirical data. At present, the explanatory comments just provide the seriousness is 20%, and when a monopoly is used, 10-15%, and in case of the concentration, then it lead to the monopolization or considerable restriction of the competition on the market is 3.3 to 7%. Ensuring the curbing effect is ensured by way of increasing of that basic percentage point by the ratio depending to what this violation is easily or just difficult to detect. And in view of the seriousness of the violation and the economic scale, the committee has proposed at the moment the present the following percentage, what is called hardcore horizontal agreed concerted actions, which are indeed rather difficult to detect. Then for the committee it's proposed to take 45% of the turnover that has been obtained and in terms of violation in the relevant territory and under just in a relevant period of time. As for other anti-competitive agreed action, it has been proposed 30% by the vertical concerted actions or some other actions when there is no too strong restriction. As for the abuse in the competitive situation, so the committee has proposed 50% to take into account the basic rate backwards, and in that case DG Compa to read that indeed the abuse in the monopoly situation is seriousness as the same as cartels, maybe initially 30 or 45% to specify the basic size of the fine. As for the curbing practices, restrictive practice, and the introduction of the rules on it's 5% of their income in case of a violation. That draft that is considered for recommendatory comments provides an opportunity for a flat rate of a fine in the so-called formal violation. These are not quite formal ones, because in any case these are violations of laws on the protection of the economic competition. But the seriousness of these violations not so seriously influencing the restriction in competition or the market on the whole. In addition, as indeed these violations are similar between themselves and in difference to other violations, as well as in the abuse concerted actions, they have some specifications that are being repeated from one relation to another, and then explanatory comment is provided. Establish a flat size of the basic fine in case of their inclination to violation in the way of submitting information and creation of the conditions to prevent activities of the committee. As I would like to point out that regretfully, the existing statistical data of the IMCO testifies that the infringing the procedure of submitting the information it considers totals the major part of the violation. As our objective to change it, but in any case, what we have today proves that this question is to be more regulated in detail. Therefore, the committee, okay, However, the committee has proposed on the issue of the responsibility to propose a matrix that provides, according to the scope of the violation, depending on economic agent, does as to decrease or increase the fine. But as a matter of fact, 3 types of violations are taken into account: not provision of information in case of the conspiracy, not provision of information in case of a research of the study, or non-submittal of the information, or any violations. There is a case on violations, or there is a law on the protection of the economic. Also, depending on the economic subject that has not submitted information or has submitted not a full information, to make some gradation. That is, if it is a third party, for example, a competitor or a consumer, which has been requested by the committee to provide information on the effects of their proposed concentration. It's one way of influence on the activity and the committee and its community. If it's considered a case on anti-competitive concerted actions and a request is necessary to specify the availability or the present violation on the prevention of this violation, it is provided the importance of this request with regards to provide or not provide information is more important. For the size of the rate of this fine is provided considerably higher than in case that has been specified before. I consider that this information will provide this information, and it may be considered in a more profound way later. In any case, in view that recommendatory comment provides for the increase or increase of the basic size, in view of the aggravating circumstances that provided in any case the basic size of the fine should not exceed 2/3 of the maximum possible size of the fine. That's the question about the abuse in the anti-monopoly situation. In any case, the basic size of the fine should not be more than 2/3 of the 10% of the overall turnover of the economic agent. If it exceeds the basic size, will total particularly 2/3 of the total turnover. Aggravating circumstances. With regards to the aggravating circumstances, the committee in that word has been provided unexpired list of softening and aggravating circumstances. Among them, that's the repeatedness of the violation that's recidives, and that's any inactivity on creation or prevention in this list. This has been explained with the explanations of and with the view of the comments that has been received from DG Compa. A decision has been made that this list should not be final. As for the softening circumstances, the cautionary circumstances, they cannot be different. The most widely spread, that's voluntary stoppage, that's compensation of the damage, a removal of the negative effects, or just but it's an arguable question on which we have received many comments. That's actually a non-compliance of the non-compliance with the concerted actions and the plain that the garbage actually was in a competition. Cooperation with the committee, also commitment of violations as a result of the intrusion of the executive authorities and a voluntary just request for the concentration in case of concentration without the required permission. One of the reasons that has not been marked in the previous draft of the comments, that's the availability of the compliance program. That's an issue that needs additional discussion. Examples. Cases. We have taken old cases that have been already just resolved by the committee that's not obtaining the permit for the consideration and this competitively agreed actions. For an example, the case on the violation of the protection of the protection of the economic relation, that is from Donetsk Zaleznica, that's on the using of the linens in trains. Actually, fines imposed was approximately 2 years ago, totaled about 50 million hryvnias. The annual proceeds of the company totaled 10 billion 800 million hryvnias. The fine total only 0.5% of the total turnover of the economic agent. In view of the provisions of the explanatory comments, the final calculation just of the fine total 1.725 million. It's considerably lower than the fine that was imposed on the economic agent before. What factors were taken into account? Duration of the violation, 2 years. The size of the proceeds, only from the market of services on using the lines in trains, railway trains, railway cars. Also, geographical scope of the market were and also an abstention. Secondly, for example, they applied 10% in the form that they compensated the negative effects. The question: to what extent the market of services of using the railway car lines is big, and particularly what the amount of proceeds should be used to specify the amount of the fine. Another case, concentration without requiring the permit of the committee. Concentration has not been burned. In any case, there were no negative effects on the restriction petition. The amount of the fine total 105,000 hryvnias, which is indeed as 0.00009%. In view of the provisions of the explanatory comments, the duration of the violation 1.5 years, that is since concentration till the voluntary application to the MCU to get the permission for concentration. In view of these provisions, the amount of the fine would total 20 million hryvnias. Also, softening or aggravating exceptions have not been taken into account because they were not presented during the case consideration. The household appliances market, both companies, and the purchaser and sellers, they were here just the market of the household appliances. As the case on the infringing the laws on the protection of the economic relation in the form of the anti-competitive concerted actions. That's now just a renowned case of unprocessed timber. that are sold at specialized auctions. As a matter of fact, that's in aggregate. That's all companies. The annual turnover total 5 billion hryvnias. Actually imposed fine total 419 million hryvnias. Duration of violation total 1 year. If we take all aggravating circumstances, there's coordination of activities also to take into account. There were no just softening of circumstances. Actual time that has been 1 year. Then the time for the calculation will be 5.6% of the annual turnover, almost by 3% lesser than actually the fine was applied for this case. Questions? That has been underlined in his introductory remarks. Our chairman, which are indeed very important for the committee. That's first, to specify basic size of the fine, empiric or unjust and lawful advantages. The first word proposed by the committee was based that it was just.
So the issue arises that committee have faced the calculation of improper advantages obtained as a result of this, because the statistical information obtained by the committee, up to 5% of the cases, you have no possibility to calculate this advantage and to apply it in the concrete and specific case. So that's why the question to the whole audience, is it proper really for purpose of calculation of basic level of sanction to calculate the improper advantage obtained, or to apply 30% or 50% approach, and the basic sanction should be based on empiric study or improper advantage, and who should bear the burden to provide information, what kind of amount should be specified, and what is the amount really is, what is the improper advantage. The business have to provide this data, or anti-monopoly so-called committee or competition committee. And so how we have to take into account the individual non-compliance or infringement, or we should have comprehensive study of the market. In the committee, we have the following practice, that concrete and specific application is based on concrete and specific infringement of the legislation. And our approach, our task is to change the practice and to analyze the market in a holistic way, in a comprehensive way, and not to protect just in general, but to protect the businesses, and to get to overcome the situation that we have to create proper competition in the market, and not to deal with only the business that infringes the rules. And as well, the issue that have been raised about 1 week ago, the calculation and the quantity mechanism. Should we base it on to and from, or it should be more discretion for the committee? What kind of percentage have to be applied, or certain percentage? So that's basically it from me. Sorry for taking too much time, but I would like to give the floor now. Who is next, actually? Or chairman is going to handle this. Я буду українською мовою. He's going to moderate in Ukrainian. And I just would like to inform you that before we'll start the next presentation, I just wanted to tell you that we have respected experts, and I just wanted to mention you that we have members of Ukrainian Parliament present here, and lawyers who are lawyers in corporate law, and as well consultants, practicing consultants in competition law. And just wanted to thank very much U.S. Embassy, economic section of U.S. Embassy is represented here, and let's utilize this chance to have fruitful discussion here, and everybody will be able to provide input in effective application of competition law. And discussion will happen at the session number 2. In case you will have any questions or ideas, please write it down and then we'll discuss it. And then as well, I just wanted to tell you that our event is actually, we can see it online in Ukraine and as well internationally, because we have it in English and in Ukrainian. And Russell Dupton, he is Associate Director of the Federal Trade Commission, United States. The floor is yours, Russell.
So fines is one tool out of many. If you are hoping to hear a formula for calculation of fines, you won't hear it from me, because instead I would like to talk about the larger context of sanctions. When we look at a violation of the competition law, we need to figure out what is the best way to prevent it from happening again, to recompense it, and ultimately to restore competition to where it should be. And the remedy should fit that purpose. It should be, fines are important if there is some knowing violation and it's necessary to deter the firm or others from doing it again. But there may also be a role for corrective remedies, which should also be part of the toolbox. Now, in the United States, deterrent sanctions are important when we have what we call per se illegal conduct. Price fixing, cartels, market division agreements, bid rigging. And for that, you can go to jail as well as to pay a fine. And there may also be penalties provided when a firm declines to comply with our orders or to provide information, just in the same way that Vice Chairman Nizhnik discussed that the fixed fines might apply. In looking at whether deterrence is appropriate, we would ask questions like, was the conduct willful? Did the person know the conduct was illegal? Or should they have been able to figure it out? If you have two competitors that are getting together and fixing prices, they either know or should know that that's wrong, and there needs to be something that will happen that will persuade them not to do that. On the other hand, or in addition, we need to ask ourselves, will the sanction reduce the potential for anti-competitive behavior in the future? Both specific deterrence, as is needed to persuade the particular economic actor not to do it again, or what we call general deterrence, which is to help educate the rest of the market through example. But there is another side to this, which is the possibility that excessive fines could deter competition. Now, let's take a look at abuse of dominance, for example. There's a very close, very fine line between vigorous competition, which is what we want to see, companies that try to put their competitors out of business by offering a better product at a lower price, and trying to put your competitor out of business through dirty tricks. One is legal, one is not. If penalties are so high, they could deter firms from competing aggressively, exactly the opposite from the result we want to achieve. Similarly, in a cartel case, there can be a line between a productive collaboration, a joint venture, or something which is perfectly normal commercial behavior, and market division agreements. So if the penalties are high in that situation, there could be a risk of deterring productive collaborative activity, which will make the economy work better. We also need to think about redress and compensation. For us, the money damages are most important in that area. We provide a private right of action, so any firm who is injured by an anti-competitive conduct may go to court and to get their damages refunded. And in our system, you actually get 3 times your damages plus your attorney's fees. Now that's controversial. I don't think anybody else has the triple damages, but it does have a deterrent effect. And significantly, it is also part of what motivates firms from hiring compliance officers and establishing compliance programs. So it has a benefit that way. Another aspect of monetary remedy is disgorgement. Now, sometimes if conduct has been so profitable that it has resulted in very high profits, even though it was unlawful, the feeling is it is not appropriate to let them keep those unlawfully obtained profits. And in cases where the violation is extremely clear, we have the power to require the firm to give up those profits. We use that very rarely. We've done it maybe 2 or 3 times ever, but it is a useful thing to have in the toolbox. Now, when we talk about how much the fine should be, I think of this in a rather simplistic way. It is how much is it going to take to deter the conduct? So let's take advantage a normal bus. And if I understand right, a ticket to ride the bus costs 2 hryvnia. You punch it in some way to show that you've used it. But it's also possible to get on and just hope that no inspector comes by. So what kind of fine would be necessary to prevent someone from riding the bus without buying a ticket? Well, the question would be, from experience, how often does the inspector come by? And if you determine that the inspector will only come by 1 trip out of 20, then there is a 1 out of 20 chance of detection. So the appropriate fine might be 20 times the cost of the ticket. And that would make the calculus for the rider say, I may as well buy the ticket or buy a pass or whatever it would take. Now, this all sounds very good in this example. The difficulty, of course, is that attaching these kind of figures to real conduct in business examples is very, very hard to do, and the data may not be available. So it's a fairly rough kind of calculation. Give you another example of deterrence. This is something which we use. This is a real case we had in the unfair competition area. Typical deceptive advertising case. The food's advertisement said the food had less fat, but in fact it had more cholesterol, sodium, and calories, and wasn't very good for you. If we penalize this with a very high sanction, what might be the effect? The effect might be to persuade firms that maybe we shouldn't try to advertise health claims at all. And if they can't advertise health claims, there's no incentive for them to develop more healthy types of food. So we don't want to do that. We had a corrective remedy instead and said, do not cross the line, but we want to encourage firms to make more healthy food because then it's better for us. Okay. One thing that's been said, I need to spend only a second on it, which is that you don't want to have the fines be so high that it would force a company out of business, because it would be a very perverse result to say we are going to sanction a violation of competition law by reducing the number of competitors in the market. So we do take the ability to pay into account. The greater goal for us is restoring conditions of competition. And if you look at our orders, this is where they focus. Injunctions, cease and desist orders, and structural remedies that will try to put competition back in the way that it was before. In merger cases, we use divestiture remedies. And conduct remedies themselves also have a deterrent effect. Firms care about their reputations. They don't want to be seen as lawbreakers. So the fact that they are said to violate the law is something they want to avoid. And if the remedies are properly publicized, they give good roadmaps to other firms as to what the lines are of what is permitted behavior and what is not. Just one closing thought on this very important exercise is that every case is different. The conduct is different, the damage is different, and some flexibility is necessary to tailor the punishment to fit the offense. So there is a need to have a careful balance between the need for predictability and transparency with the flexibility to come up with the proper remedy. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую, пане Дампов. Наступний спікер. Слово надається пану Пьотру Адамчевському з Польського конкуренційного відомства.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I have a key? Thank you very much. My presentation will focus on factors which generally qualify to adjust the basic amount of fines. As we all know, some authorities have some kind of guidelines detailing the application of these fine-tuning aspects, and in other systems, the governing principles are to be worked out by case. However, the EU decided to adopt new guidelines in 2006, and also in our Polish system we decided to adopt our own guidelines in 2009, which were taken into amendment in 2011. And I think it is important to have a new guidelines in the Ukraine in order to achieve a great level of transparency and reliability. I can say that the recommendatory explanation provides for two stages of setting the fine, setting the basic amount of fine and then adjusting it to the taking into account aggravating and mitigating elements. And in my opinion, those aggravating and mitigating elements reflects the international practice in this area. And now, what we should consider as an aggravating element. First, it's duration, and duration can play a different role in the calculation of the fine. It can be sometimes considered as a mitigating or aggravating circumstances, depending on the relative length of the infringement. And in Ukrainian recommendatory explanation, the duration is already included in setting the basic amount of fine, as it refers to the sales on which the fine are based, that the sales is made during the infringement period. However, it is recommendatory explanation provide for aggravating element where period of violation exceeds 1 year. So I think that duration is additionally pressed by the aggravating elements. Then we have recidivism, and again it's also included in the Ukrainian recommendatory explanations. I would say that the period of time when the repeated action of similar infringement is taken into account can be quite short, because the Ukrainian explanations provide for only 3 years period, and for example the EU can put much further into the former infringement, so it's maybe worth to reconsider it again. Another aggravating element is the role of undertaking in the infringement, and it means that it's the initiating or managing actions. In the EU, the Commission also pay particular attention to any steps taken to coerce other undertakings to be part of violation. Mm. Another one point is the refusal to cooperate. It's generally known as obstruction. It is important to note that non-compliance with procedural obligation can be subject to autonomous sanctions, whether or not a final decision on a substantive infringement is reached. However, it can be also taken into account when we set the fines in the end of the procedure. If the obstruction was really severe and it really influenced the conduct of the investigation, I would suggest to always take it into account. There are most basic factors which can lead to aggravation of the fine. However, in different jurisdictions, there are also other aspects which can be taken by the authority when calculating the final fine. And one interesting one which we have in Poland is the degree of premeditation. I realize that it's very difficult to find out what was the degree of premeditation, what was the aim of the company. However, sometimes from the evidence we see that this level was really high and it deserves to be additionally fining. And what is important writing the recommendatory explanation is to put that the aggravating elements should not be exhaustive. And sometimes during different case-by-case situations, it can occur that we need to take into account another aspects of the case, and I would suggest that the recommendatory explanation should leave some discretion to the authority and say that those elements which are provided for by the explanations are just set in particular. Now we also have mitigating elements, and those elements provided for by the Ukrainian recommendatory explanations are also quite similar to the international practice. First, it's the immediate termination of the infringement, and it is very important that it should be taken into account only when the undertaking stops its violation just after the start or the launch of the proceedings. We in Poland, we are not interested in the late termination of the infringement. If it stops immediately, it can deserve, I can say from our practice, it can deserve even 30% of discount. So it is a very important factor of mitigating the fine. Another mitigating element is negligence. However, with this factor, it's very difficult to prove for the undertaking that breaking the competition rules were actually made by negligence. In practice, it is very rarely where such a factor can be taken into account. Limited participation is also, of course, a very important issue. The company can prove that its involvement in the violation was substantially limited. Even they can prove that they try to avoid breaking the competition rules. They just take part in the cartel or in other anti-competitive behavior by accident, or they pretend to follow the rules of cartel. However, the authority should be very careful with those evidences providing for by undertakings. It should not be enough for undertaking to prove that its limited participations was just because of the short time of engagement in the cartel. Another mitigating element is the effective cooperation in the EU. That means that Commission obtains the information from the undertakings beyond its leniency application or besides its legal obligation to giving those evidences. And here I think it's a very similar situation when Ukrainian authority provides for the mitigation element where the company sent information, sent evidences which was not obliged to do that. However, it is very important to set a strict line between this element of this mitigating element and the leniency application, because sometimes it can be treated as an additional benefit from the company which applied for leniency, and I'm not sure whether this is the aim of the authority or not. Another mitigating element is a state action defense, and it is circumstances where anti-competitive conduct has been authorized or encouraged by the public authority or by legislation. And this element is quite obvious and used very often. I think it's the same here. Of course, this list is also not exhaustive, and there are different aspects which can be taken into account as a mitigating elements. And one which is very interesting and which is also including in the explanatory recommendatory explanation is restitution to victims. If it is possible, and it is possible to find out what was the gains of the infringer, it would be very useful if the infringer, before issuing the decision, would restitute those benefits to its victims. And all those elements should be taken into account in the case-by-case basis. It means that the authority shouldn't provide for the gravity of percentages which will be taken into account directly to one element or another. This is what most jurisdictions try to avoid to do that, and in the EU system, only recidivism means that it is possible to increase the fine by 100%. And the rest of those elements, the aggravating but also mitigating elements, are treated with a discretion. It means that it should be assessed in the specific case, and probably then the authority will have enough discretion to set a proper fine. As I said, in the EU system there is only recidivism, which is connected to a concrete percentage. It's 100%, but in Poland we said that it is possible to increase or decrease fine by 50%, taking into account all aggravating and mitigating elements. So we have this border, this threshold, and we need to move inside that. Thank you very much.
Дуже дякую вам за цікаву презентацію. Наступний спікер – це пан Сильвер Лефер, секретар з правових питань Європейського суду. Будь ласка.
I would like to start with a few words to thank the organizer First, for the interest of the topic, as a General Court of European Union, we mostly control the legality of what the Commission is doing, so we tend to hear a lot about fines, but it is quite a unique opportunity to give an opinion on a draft proposal. There's a reason why I would like to thank the organizer. They're giving me the possibility to deliver a speech in English, which for a Frenchman is always somehow challenging. I'll divide my speech in two parts. The first one will concern the legal status of guidelines on fines in EU law, as well as the advantage they represent for both parties, the undertakings, but as well as the Commission. And in the second part, I will concentrate on my own and personal, and I emphasize on that personal, opinions on the draft proposals. So, what are guidelines on fines in European Union law? Well, they are self-imposed rules by the Commission in an area in which it enjoys wide discretionary powers. Wide discretionary powers because if one looks at the relevant legislation, first Regulation 17, now Regulation 1/2003, there's absolutely nearly nothing about fines. There's only three elements. The Commission must take into account gravity, duration, and cannot go beyond 10% of annual turnover. That's it. And the Commission came under quite a lot of pressure from the business world, but also from the Court of Justice and the General Court, which led to the adoption of guidelines on the setting of fines in 1998, which were repealed and changed in 2006 in a way which might not be entirely favorable to the undertakings. Now, those guidelines cannot be analyzed in an isolated ways. They are part of a wider picture in which you have other notices and guidelines, and one is very important, is a leniency notice. The application of the 2006 guidelines can lead to very important amount of fines, but they can be substantially reduced if the undertaking is willing to cooperate. Now, I am saying that guidelines are ensuring legal certainty for the undertaking concerns, first. They ease the work of the Commission, second. But third, it must be kept in mind that there are no regulation and their legal status is somehow limited. Why do they ensure legal certainty? Not because they are explaining what the Commission is willing to do, that is part of the answer, but also, and I like to put the emphasis on that, is because they are enforceable before the General Court. If the Commission departs without due justification from the methodology it set up, then it can lead to an annulment of the decision. So there can be certainty for the undertakings that the methodology as a principle will be respected. For there to be proper enforceability, I would suggest that you need to have two elements in guidelines. The first one is a clear expression of the intention of the author of the document, the Commission, to bind itself. The second one is that you need to have a wording of the provision which is sufficiently clear and precise. And here I can draw quite a distinction because, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the difficulty of defining the relevant market. Well, we have a notice on the definition of the relevant market in EU law from 1997. This document is also adopted in an area of discretionary powers, and it gives a certain number of ideas. It's a useful document, but it's nearly impossible to rely on it in front of the EU court, because the Commission offers alternative ways of defining the market without prioritizing them. So when you have this kind of vague wording, then there's no real legal certainty. There's flexibility, of course, for the administration, but there is no legal certainty. The fine guidelines, the 1998 one, maybe a bit less, the 2006 one, the leniency notice, are drafted in a way which is sufficiently clear to be enforced in front of the General Court. So they do provide legal certainty. That's for the undertaking concerns. But they also represent benefits for the Commission. What is a benefit for the Commission? Well, it facilitates the work of the Commission. Under EU law, there's a very strict duty to state reason. The Commission must explain in the greater details why it reaches a decision, especially in the field of competition law, where now we are finding abuse of dominance above 1 billion euros. Yet, if you look at a decision like Intel, which is a very lengthy one, the vast majority of the recitals were not on the amount of the fines. They were on the definition of the market, they were on fidelity rebates, they were on all issues pertinent to the issue of whether there is an infringement. But when it comes to the actual recitals on fines, which led to 1 billion, there are not that many. Why? Because the Commission was in a position to say, well, I am making use of my fining policy. So the reasoning is somewhere else, you can make reference to it. So it is the work of the Commission. It provides legal certainty for the undertaking concern. It's a perfect world. Well, not really, because, and that would be my third point, guidelines are no regulations. There are no regulation because there's a principle which I think we can find in the administrative law of many member states, is that when the administration fetters or limits its discretion, it must be ready not to apply its guidelines in exceptional circumstances. Otherwise, it is abducting a regulation, and it has no power to do so. So very early on, the Court of Justice and the General Court made clear that the Commission must be ready not to apply its guidelines in situation exceptional. And that's something that wasn't considered in the 1998 guidelines. Now it is clearly stated in Recital 37 of the 2006 guidelines, which states, although these guidelines present a general methodology for the setting of fines, the particularities of a given case or the need to achieve deterrence in a particular case may justify departing from such methodology. This can be for the benefits of the undertaking concerned, but this can also be against them. We have a recent case, which is the AC Treuhand case, in which you had one undertaking which participate in the cartel in a very particular way, in the sense that it was mostly a facilitator. He was basically hosting meetings, he was circulating information, but had no sales, had no activities in the market product. Obviously, it said, well, I shouldn't have a fine, where's my sales? And the Commission actually set up a fine using a different method, saying, well, your situation is exceptional, we do not apply the guidelines. This is quite normal, and it's not a problem in terms of legal certainty or equal treatment, because when the Commission does that, when it doesn't apply its guidelines, then it is under an higher duty in terms of explaining why it does so, and it really must demonstrate that there are good reasons for departing from its policy. The second reason why guidelines are no regulation is that they are not binding on the General Court. The General Court, in terms of competition law, has what we call an unlimited jurisdiction. That is to say that the court can modify fines for any reason it sees fit. So obviously, it is not bound by guidelines. But then you can have situations in which the General Court considered that there had been a violation of the guidelines, but the actual amount of the fine was sufficient. So it can work both ways. It can both work in favor of the undertakings. It can also work in favor of the Commission. Okay, those were my very brief and quick comments on guidelines in EU law. Now, based on that, I would like to express my comments on the draft proposals focusing on the issues of legal certainty. And here, pardon me, I would distinguish between issues of substance and issues of form or drafting. In terms of issues of substance, I will say that I find that there are elements of legal certainty which are much higher in the draft proposal than in the 2006 guidelines. Notably, one changes from the 1998 guidelines to the 2006 guidelines was that the commissions decided not to use the repartition between most serious, serious, and minor offense. So this is something which was criticized by academics, criticized in the business world, and I think it's a very good thing, but then I'm only expressing my personal opinion, that the draft proposal are not going this way, and that there's a clear distinction in paragraph 9 between 4 types of offenses relating to 4 clear stated types of infringement, for which basically undertakings can have a clear idea that if they're going into that direction, well, they will be facing with that type of sanction. That's my first comment on substance. My second comment on substance, and here I might be of a different opinion than DG Comp, if I understand well. I find it a very good thing in terms of legal certainty that aggravating circumstances in the draft proposals are expressed in an exhaustive way. It has never been the case because the Commission has always seen fit to consider that both in the 1998 regulation and the 2006 that the sky is the limit or 10% the limit, and if we find that you've been naughty in a different way than we first thought, we should punish you for that. Well, I think that in terms of legal certainty, a word such as such in our guidelines is not extremely good, and I don't think it will be a very good thing if you were to change it into a limitative list. But that's my personal opinion. So those are, I think, 2 good things in terms of substance. Now, listening to the very interesting speech of Madam Vice Chairman, I found out something which I am not too sure of, but as I said, I've only had the document a few days ago, so forgive me if I say something stupid, but it's this idea of benefit of or revenues as a means to establish the basic amount of fine. Well, we have the concept of sales in the 1998 and the 2006 regulation. So basically, the basic amount of fines will be based on the sales. Sales is a wide concept. If you have, for instance, an agreement on derivatives, obviously sales will be established in a specific way. So it's a wide concept that can be used to adapt to the situation. The good thing is that it is objective. Whether the company has been making a lot of profit out of its anti-competition behavior or basically been unproductive in it, it will be punished in the same way. And in terms of debtors, that's quite a good element. And also, how do you measure advantage? I mean, if we change subject and if we're looking at state aid litigation, I can tell you that the Commission and the General Court have been suffering for years and years to find out whether a given measure has provided an advantage to a certain company. It's such a wide concept, such a vague concept, that it's open to all types of agreements. So I don't, well, as I said, it's my personal opinion, but in terms of legal certainty as well as deterrence, I think something as vague, as complicated as advantage can be quite difficult to master in practice. Now, those were my 3 comments on substance. I will just make 1 short comment on drafting and form, but please bear in mind that I only had the English version. If you compare the 2006 regulation with the draft proposals, there's a clear difference. I mean, reading the 2006 guidelines, it is clear that the Commission will apply this policy, save in exceptional circumstances, but then it will be under an extra burden in terms of explaining why it did so. When I read Article 8, 9, 10, 11, the language seems to imply that it is merely a proposal. We might do it, we might not do it. The abundant use of the word "it is recommended" in a way could lead people to believe, well, I will never be able to enforce that in front of a court, because the Commission will say, well, I didn't bind myself, I just made a mere proposal. So I think the approach that we have in the 2006 guidelines, which is to say, as a principle, we will be bound by a word, save in exceptional circumstances, point 37, is probably, well, I don't think if it's better or not, but it gives a clear picture in terms of legal certainty. And also, when the Commission does not apply its guidelines, it is really, I mean, the onus of proof is on her, isn't it? Well, I don't know if I've respected my time, but that will end my comments, and I thank you for your attention.
Дуже дякую, пан Ліфер. Я думаю, що багато запитань буде і пропозицій з приводу вашої презентації також пізніше. І зараз я хочу запросити до виступу, це завжди роблю з задоволенням, це пан Хасан Какая, член експертної ради Фонду розвитку конкуренції. Будь ласка.
Thank you very much, Sergey. The advantage of speaking after many distinguished speakers is that I think a large part of my job has already been done. So I will focus only on those which have not done. There is a long presentation. I will not go through all of it, but let me just give the main points that I would like to emphasize. The first is that the discussion on sanctions must be placed within the overall approach to enforcement of competition law and policy. So it is one of the many tools that the agency will have to put in place for enforcing the law, and not the only one. That's the first element. Maybe that's a slide, please. The second point to mention, and I think also was mentioned earlier, is that sanction and remedies complement each other. I will not go, as I said, I will not go through all of the presentation because it's rather long, and many of the points have already been covered. And therefore, the purpose of sanctions can be either in terms of deterrence, or they can seek to be punitive. Now, I think also it's important to distinguish at this stage of the discussion between criminal sanctions and administrative and civil sanctions, in the sense that criminal sanctions are not related in any way directly to the harm that they cause, because the purpose of criminal offenses is to eradicate the conduct, and therefore there is no link in there, whereas the discussion on civil and administrative are linked to the harm they are causing. I think this is the discussion we've argued. But the way I presented the presentation here is to say that I think it's very important to ask what is required of the undertaking in business and what is required from the Anti-Monopoly Committee. And on the first point, which there are a large number of slices on this, is the need to put in place a compliance mechanism. That the undertakers in the business themselves need to put in place a compliance mechanism, a voluntary compliance with the law, and this will avoid many of the problems that will limit their freedom to engage in trade and will sanction some of the profits they will be able to make if they comply with the law. I think this is very important. And that requires compliance at the highest level from the head of the agencies, the resources, including sanctions within the undertaking, that the undertaking themselves can sanction rogue conduct by a certain member of the undertakings. So this part of the compliance, I think, is very important. But business cannot do compliance alone. The Anti-Monopoly Committee is in a better position to explain to the undertaking and business community what is it that they're supposed to comply with. And for this, I think we've had a discussion about the need for legal certainty, need to explain exactly what the law means and what is it that each business needs to comply
whether in terms of abuse of dominance or anti-competitive agreement, excessive pricing, etc. So I think they need clarity for this, having alongside the guidelines that have been suggested, not only on something specifically on sanctions and cases, but also on compliance program. And this will be, I think, extremely important, because there is a link, and some of the best practices in EU and worldwide, that in some of mitigating factor that appears is whether the enterprises have a compliance program and whether that compliance program is being enforced effectively. The second element that I think is so important to mention, in addition to the compliance program, that what the enterprises themselves ought to do is to explain in cases of a breach or violation of a competition law, how the sanction can be done. Here again, I think it's important to emphasize two elements. First is the content of sanction in the legislative part, in other words, in the law itself. And this perhaps is something that maybe could be considered in the next revision of the anti-monopoly law, that what exists already there could be revised to take into account the changes in the law. The second part of the enforcement of the sanction is the part which deals with determining specific sanctions in specific case, and what are the elements that need to be taken in there. And this is a very complex issue. I think it's not only for young agencies or middle-aged agencies like the anti-monopoly committees, but even more mature in US, in Germany, and other EU struggle with the technical issues of how to determine the specific case involving this. Now, some of these, I think they were already alerted to. One of the questions that were raised earlier is the question of the definition of relevant market. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but let me just draw some of the points which I think are very critical and which are not addressed in the guideline. The first is that the definition of relevant market, I think, is very important. But what is very specifically required here from the determination, because the law general only give a maximum ceiling, but does not provide what should be the range of the fines based on the, and here I think the question is whether there is a inappropriate translation of the word profit or excess profit into an advantage. My reading was that perhaps maybe some editing of the text would bring out excessive profit or profit above the competitive level that would determine what is the advantage. And I think this will be more useful to determine what is the excessive profit or profit that is above the competitive level, competitive price level. But the problem is extremely difficult to determine, because if you ask yourself from an economic point of view, what is profit? By definitions from Economic 100 is that it's the total cost, total revenue minus total costs. And your total revenues are the price you charge times the total sales you collect plus the cost. But when you go to the market and you want to determine the price, which price do you look at? You're going to look at the price on the tags on market. But is that a competitive price, or is it the monopolist price? Or is it something in between? So you do not know exactly whether that price that you're going to calculate, you're going to obtain on the market, is the competitive. Because if you are already in a situation where, let's say, there are only two competitors, there might be competition, but there are only two players, the price might be already the price which is 10, 20% above the competitive prices if you had four competitors. But you don't have four competitors. So if you use that price, you would already have an underestimation of what the advantage or the excessive profit will be in place. That's the first part. The second element, which you need detailed information, and I think the notice would need to look at, not so much in the differential relevant market, but also the relationship between the price and the so-called elasticity of demand. In other words, how does the demand respond to prices? For example, if you look at in petrol, the demand for petrol for car is wherever it is, you will buy it. So the ability to find a substitute is very limited. Whereas if you look at some consumer goods, let's say food items, you might find substitutes. And therefore, if the price changes very small, you can move to substitutes. which is another element of the determinant relevant market. But to obtain the elasticity of demand, the detailed statistic of this is very difficult to obtain for element for that. But that should be, in my view, as part, I think, in annex or detailed guidelines on what should be the determinant of the excessive profit. And then relating to this, I said, if you have a market where there is a value, it's a new product, maybe the price will be relatively quite high because it's just into the market. But that's normal revenue. It's not excessive revenue. If you use the first formula, which is the competitive price should be, because that's what it is outside, but this is not in relevant market here, then you would overestimate the profit or the excessive profit that you think will come out from the discussion. So those are, I think, are extremely important elements which are relevant here. This is just if you have one enterprise. But most of the cases, suppose you have a cartel or 2 or 3 companies involved, one at distribution level and one which are at the production level, then you have to determine what is the part of each of these parties. Who is responsible for what? Because, for example, if you are on top, you're selling, the wholesaler, and you are engaged in excessive pricing, you pass it to me. I will pass it on to somebody else. Now, are we going to count the excessive price and the excessive price? Will be double counting, because all I did is pass on our price that were charged. I passed on to the distributor, who might pass it on to the consumer. So you have to be very, very careful in how to calculate the so-called excessive advantage that you may have in stage 1, stage 2, and to total market for this. So this is an extremely complex exercise, which I think there are some good econometrics techniques which are available for doing work. But it isn't easy to do, because the raw material, the data, the information you need to have is extremely very important and may not be available. And this is perhaps why many competition agencies would not bind themselves with a specific methodology, because you may not be able to implement it. But it's important at least to discuss it and bring it out in discussion here. And then if it is a cartel, as I said, a number of elements were mentioned. One, the aggravating factor, one is the duration. It's very difficult to obtain data. And when did actually the cartel start? When this product said? For that, you need to be able to compel the business to provide you with that data. And one of I think many of the peer reviewers have identified this, that the Anti-Monopoly Committee need to have its power reinforced in order to compel businesses to provide this type of information and to cooperate. Because without providing this information, it is very difficult to have, let's say, a fair and transparent way that you would say this is what the harm has been done and how much, I would say, damages or sanction can be applied to it. Related to this question of the data, I think in the guidelines there are a number of percentages that have been proposed, around 45 for cartel, 35 for abuse of dominance, and 7 for merger. Well, coming with the last one, I'm a bit surprised that there will be sanction on mergers, because usually mergers are not antitrust. Just company want to merge, so I'm a bit surprised that there are proposals for sanctioning. If this for non-reporting data, I mean, that will be different. But if it is for merger, I mean, that's one question to ask. The second question is, what are these percentages on? When you say 45%, are they of the total market? Yeah, but okay. But now the question for this is that normally if you want deterrence should be on 100% of the market. If let's say, a cartel has abused, let's say, or engaged in excessive overpricing when for the relevant market of, let's say, 10 million, which is the domestic market, then normally the current practice and best practice worldwide is 100% of that, and in the US it's triple damages. It's 3 times what damage has been done for cases. So I wasn't. I didn't understand why only 45% of the damage will be sanctioned. No, sorry. Anyway, I mean, just my comment. If it is a percentage of the relevant market, which of the damage done, then the question is why should? Yeah, but why if we have 100% which is subject to cartel, why should we only calculate the damage on a 50% of the relevant market? Yeah, but but then it is on the 100% market, not 54% of the market. This is my question. It's It's just as a comment on this. It was a clarification on whether it's what does the percentage refer to? If it refers to the relevant market, which is subject and is domestic, not international. I think if international, this will be a huge amount of money. But if it is, let's say, the domestic market or the regional market in one of the territories of Ukraine, then the practice would mean if we seek deterrence, then it should be on the 100% of that market if it is affected. And then beyond that, then the cost will be whatever percentage could be applied on the 100% of the market. And I think one also have to remember that which maybe the guideline take implicitly into account is that more and more, and I think this will be also the case in Ukraine, is that there will be more private action taken back on this and other follow-up actions on these cases. So perhaps that should also be taken into account in the guidelines. One last point, which I think it take us to the next session discussion, which is on transparency, is that there is really a balance between how much transparency the guideline should provide and how much does it undermine the deterrence effect. Because clearly, a lot of empirical evidence shows that cartels are rational, profit maximizing individuals. So if you provide 100% of transparency with all information, there is totally nothing unknown, all of it will be factored in the cost. And will say, can I pay first? And let me get on with my cartel. So you've got to strike a balance between a stochastic element, a little bit of unknown, and for the law to actually be effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan. У нас вже є декілька запитань для дискусії, ми їх будемо розглядати під час дискусії, під час другої сесії, або якщо у нас залишиться час. Але так як у нас тільки 10 хвилин, то часу, напевне, залишиться, тому що у нас ще є дві презентації коротких від Фонду розвитку конкуренції. Спочатку зроблю презентацію я. Це технічні правові питання, які ми вважаємо доцільним за...
Now, when we are talking about improving and upgrading recommendations, I'll check it out. Our presentation is there, or it's not there, or what? Or what? And in the first presentation, we want to talk about upgrading general, improving general presentation and general approaches. And paragraph 3 of the explanations and the descriptions, we want to explain in more detail, to have clear a legal description of this, because we have proportionality and non-discrimination of application and this have to be specified in the law, because these are legal grounds, a legal basis. And the anti-monopoly or competition agency will decide about the amount of sanction and proportionality that prevents from happening this non-compliance. This is not in compliance with proportionality, because just proportionality actually just specifies the proportion of the sanction in the violation and the character of non-compliance of this issue and economic and legal consequences of the event and how rational it is. It is specified in the Civil Code, the Article 3 of the Civil Code, that paragraph 6, but the definition about the rationale and it's not defined in the and the rationale how rational it is, it's based on Anglo-Saxon common law, reasonless, just in the English in common law system, and in Ukrainian it sounds like rationale of this, and this specify and that's why it is used in the common law system. And accordingly, what I just wanted to mention, as of today, Article 4 of the are already on anti-monopoly AMCU, and in particular it should be in compliance with the law, and competition have to be natural persons and actual legal entities are even in the application of law. And non-discrimination principle have to be applied. Compliance with the law, definitely Article 4 on law, and should be reasonless and proportionality includes this. And we need to refer in having the reference in case the experts will agree with this. In the paragraph 3, we have to refer to the principles of AMCU, whatever is specified in paragraph 4 on AMCU law as the basis for applying the sanction for non-compliance with the law. And we recommend the following recommendation. When the sanction amount is calculated for infringement of the or non-compliance, it should be based on compliance with the law and protection of the competitiveness specified in the Article 4 Law of Ukraine on Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, AMCU. And with respect to proportionality principle, we would like to include, it's very important principle, it should be specified in more detail, and probably we need to amend law on economic competitiveness in Ukraine. We offer the following version. Proportionality principle, when defined the sanction for non-compliance with the law and protection of economic competition, it should be proportional to the character and the way of infringement, and economic and legal consequences should be taken into account. That's the principle. And paragraph 7, actually bullet point number 7, the basic level of sanction, it actually specifies about the impact of restraining it, preventing it from happening, and the basic sanction have to be taken into account the time period of infringement and other factors that this impact have to be taken into account when we have the final calculation of the amount. So paragraph 4 in item 7 have to be deleted. In this version, we want to increase amount of basic sanction to certain percentage for purposes of having a restraining effect, taking into account the circumstances, or we have to take into account EU practice. There are regs on sanctions and application. The sanction have to be having a restraining impact. And because taking into account the practice, we have to the following. It's the wrong presentation probably, and we offer the following amendments to general approaches, and the committee in certain cases, certain amounts have to be charged additional to get it away from basic calculation of amount of sanction. And the first of ideas to upgrade and improve recommendations from the Fund of Competition. And I just wanted to give the floor to Mr. Melnichenko. He is representing competition, and I just wanted to thank you for giving me the floor. And it works, yeah, it works. And other ideas on competition law from our foundation. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the following with respect to paragraph 4, actually item 4 in your. We are talking about further sanction that is higher than specified in the explanation. So we think that this higher amount of sanction may cause unpredictable sanction, because the definition exclusive circumstances. What is exclusive circumstances? And exclusive circumstances have to be specified in the law on economic competition. I just wanted to remind of this roundtable participants, and there is already the provision that can be applied, the threat to the system of market economy. And you know, this is due to when there is monopoly and anti-monopoly, but this and we have to specify the cases when maximum amount of sanction can be applied. The paragraph 4, in case infringement of competition law that is really the threat to the market economy in general, the sanction have to be applied in the amount that is close to the upper limit of the sanction specified in paragraph 2 and part 3 of Article 52 of the law. And the decision specified have to be adopted by the board, a meeting of the anti-monopoly body of Ukraine. And with respect to infringement specified part 21st of the law, and our fund offers not to apply higher sanction than specified in the draft, because improper competition is not a threat, just actually. And with respect to item 6, we have to base it on paragraph 2nd, but what is specified in item 6, it's outside the recommendations and actually contain the following. Actually, it should be specified in the competitive advantage or other benefits. It's 6.1.2 in the draft, or comments or bylaws on the laws that have to be utilized. 6.1.1 or specified part 4 in the preamble of the item 6 of the draft. And as well, there is attempt made to return back the subjective part on competitive infringement. That is not actually applied from the very beginning of applying the law on economic competition. 613 it's specified the members of the cartel or group that were not aware about infringement of the law. But you know, law on limiting the monopoly, that was the first law in the competition law. It was containing the guilt and responsibility and formula of violation, and Mr. Zavada, the first head of anti-monopoly committee, is present here, and he remembers that at one of the sessions I just asked to delete this paragraph. And it was supported at that period of time. And now, in the law on economic competition, there is no subjective part of infringement, and it was a conscious decision not to. It's part of criminal law or other laws. The subjective part of infringement of the legislation should not be in this part. It should be available for research and development discussions and scientific discussions, what kind of future law can be applied with respect to economic competition. And taking into account the above mentioned, we offer the following. We need to pay attention to the following, that already now Article 52 of the law, Part 4 of this article, specifies the exhaustive list of the entities that sanctions can be applied. And we think that item 6 in the draft should be in the following version. In case infringing population on economic competition by legal entities and natural persons that are part of the groups should follow the provisions specified in Part 4, Article 52 of the law. I just wanted to thank very much participants in the discussions. I think discussions just are only starting, but getting back to the subjective part of it, I just wanted to say that to Maria and Yuri, we should not care that somebody carelessly, and these discussions that we got from our participants and actually Hassan in Kakai, we are getting back to the legal nature of competition law, and this discussion have to be taken part. And what is part of it, and this discussion have to be taken. And what is anti-monopoly committee? We have to so definitely about negligence, about carelessness, and whatever. And who is able to task the anti-monopoly committee, and what is really. And how dispute resolution have to be taken? What is the agency? What is the way? Administrative court or economic court, as it is specified in the competition law. Thank you for taking part, but because we have lack of time, I have to stop now. So these are the thoughts of our Fund of Competition Legislation Development, and it would be good to discuss it later. And I just wanted to say the following, that competition fund, that's very important initiative. You are doing really important stuff. You're doing really very important work, and we would like to facilitate your activities. And this is something new in the practice of applying it and introducing an amendment in the legislation. I would like to thank you very much for that. And now we are going to have coffee break, and during coffee break we are going to have press conference. Please, mass media, you can get to this part of the session, and those who are interested, they can attend the press conference. And the rest of the delegates, they'll have coffee break, and you can enjoy your coffee or tea or whatever. And we'll start next session at 4:30 p.m. 4:30 p.m., please, we resume. Dear delegates, let's resume our roundtable discussion. So, other delegates will join us during the event. Unfortunately, we were unable to finalize some part of our discussion, and we'll take about half an hour of the next session. And some experts wanted to talk about recommendations a little bit. Just wanted to give the floor to well-known expert in anti-monopoly legislation or competition law, an MP in Ukrainian Parliament, Ptashnik. Dear, so well known, it's too much about me, but I'm not going to talk about the bottom line of these recommendations, because that's the business of competition agency or anti-monopoly, AMCU, AMCU. We can improve it thanks to recommendations from NGOs and businesses and whatever. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the following. First of all, that's for the first time within the last years, that's the first discussion that happens when we have already the document to talk about, because Piotr have mentioned already that he is welcoming the new guidelines and whatever. These are not new guidelines, but the first ones, the first introduced kind of stuff, because in competition agency, or we call it anti-monopoly committee, unfortunately, such document never existed in this agency. At least for the we never discussed it openly the way we are discussing it now. I am really grateful that we have this initiative, and I hope that we will adopt the document finally, and we'll apply it even. So, but what we need to do? We need to create such legislation and bylaws that will be working even when competition agency will be replaced. I mean, top officials. That then the future authorities in the competition legislation, competition agency, and anti-monopoly agency. So, despite all the lobbyists and influences, they will apply it the same way it is applied now. And the recommendations in this document are very much important. We know pretty well that recommendations means sometimes here that sometimes you apply, sometimes you do not apply. That's recommendations Ukrainian way. And we had a discussion with anti-monopoly committee. Do we need to register these documents in the Ministry of Justice? Should we make it a norm document? And to my mind, my opinion, maybe you will disagree with this, or anti-monopoly committee will disagree with that, because I think that's something that is needed. This is kind of preventive measure. That this means that something is not going to happen in the society. Suddenly, anti-monopoly committee wakes up and changes the rule of the game in accordance with certain circumstances, or the top officials will be replaced and they will be happy to adjust it to their needs. So I think that mandatory registration in the Ministry of Justice will be kind of preventive measure to make sure it's not happening. And the mandatory character of the document, but at the same time, we need discretion provided to the anti-monopoly committee. But definitely, general character should be mandatory. And only in such case, businesses, when they'll complain and appeal and sue in court, whatever, they'll be able to apply this document, and they will refer to this document as norm document. Otherwise, unfortunately, these recommendations are not going to be mandatory for the court. I think it's really very much needed. The rest we can work a lot, but in case we disagree with the concept, this kind of explanations will be just recommendations for the sake of recommendations, and we won't have transparency in the operations of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, not only now, but for the future years. And thank you. That's my comments. Thank you. And now I just wanted to give the floor Alexander Leonidovich Zavada. Good afternoon, dear participants. I just wanted to add and emphasize this point and the discussion even of this document. That's a breakthrough, really. And what else? But still, that's the first document, and the status of kind of this document have to be approved and have to be applied as fast as possible. In case we will make it norm document approved by the Ministry of Justice, it will take another year for us because lots of issues may arise. And in some cases we are like pioneers, we are opening the way. And it's hard to adopt such decisions, and we can make mistakes. And as Alexander Ivanovich have drafted this document, and they started with the temporary regs or bylaws, and when we managed to learn lessons, we managed to make it a law. And we had a dream, actually, that we are going to have procedure code and to specify everything. Just wanted to do it stage by stage.
The question of registering, not registering this document at the Ministry of Justice has some positive advantages and as well as risks. Well, we should discuss that. As for the document itself, undoubtedly, no matter what document is, no matter how long discussion is, at some stage the Anti-Monopoly Committee should just finish this work, put and put it into effect. Nevertheless, I would like, just in view that we have in the audience, we have represented not only from this government and from the civil society as well as from the business circles. Though for those who would be really paying these fines if something is not complied with. In this point of view, I would like that under any circumstances to not have the formalism in a document. That is, the document in itself is built by 95% just relating to the practical subject matter. For example, as for the issue whether we need to replace the principle of proportionality and the substantiation non-discriminatory nature, the more detailed the better. Let's keep it. Let's keep both things. So let's have the principle of the law to be a branch into two. For this detailization to be present, for us it's important because whether it will be registered at the Ministry of Justice or not, it's important document for courts. If something is infringed, then it can be argumented and will be a prompt while submitting these actions. Nevertheless, some gaps are still present. The question is about the economic concentration. We mean the concentration as the medieval just seriousness. On the one hand, its economic concentration might lead to the total monopolization in the market. It's the same way as cartels, but yet at a long-term basis. If we want to range infringements by their types, then in that regard, we are just confronting the formalism. With each type of infringement, there will be a threat of monopolization. Aside from the unfair competition, the not submission of the information. Therefore, in this regard, one should. I'm not ready now. I think that in close future we'll have a meeting of the public council. Then we'll have this discussed in detail. Probably these main criteria should be just unlawful advantage and the damage caused by the infringement, because to arrange it by a type of an infringement, that's already a deviation from key principle. Why I was just concerned by them, if the committee just imposed earlier in the size of 300,000, but under this methodology it will be just more in millions, but that didn't cause damage to concentration. I might be mistaken, but it seemed to me that not. Therefore, in such volumes for infringement that didn't cause any damage to competition, probably it's wrongful in present conditions, particularly when the economy is in the crisis, and particularly when some cases of concentration are quite complicated for measuring, and with regards with the need to getting the permissions. At the third, fourth levels, when third parties are involved, and not always with the involvement of the persons responsible. Therefore, this aspect is very important. That concentration, particular attention should be paid to concentration, by imposing the highest fines for infringements that led to monopolization, but not to those infringements that have not made an impact on the concentration. In another aspect, item 6. Well, the proposals were submitted. Indeed, I would like to corroborate that article. Well, part 4 of Article 52, to which Alexander Ivanovich referred, it is, well, the time just passed, and I'm already just feeling despair, because without an activity, a person might be brought to responsibility. That is, I feel in this a principle of violation of the law rule, where a person should be responsible for his or her activities. If we will extract it and will make only a reference to that article, then we violate the principle of certainty which we would like to attain. In this situation, I vice versa consider that this probably not quite well worded paragraph 4 should be explained, probably not now, probably in next explanations, but one should understand how the committee would treat it. Probably the individual didn't know about, and know, just conventionally speak, an abstract example, for example, a pawn shop has been bought, or just a pawn shop has acquired a stolen thing, whether it bears the responsibility if it earned some money, but if it's an accomplice in a crime, and so on and so forth. For the cleanness of a theory, for at present not to have problems and concerns from the business circles, if the committee declares that it will apply this provision while just proving just inactivity or activity, that the individual didn't prevent commitment of the crime, probably it will be perceived properly. But it's just an arguable article. It is not the final proposal. It's still the answer how to apply this paragraph would be a good thing. Of course, on rights. There's a person that had rights. It should be extracted. In the paragraph itself, it is mentioned at the beginning, but where just there is a list of individuals to be fined, it is not mentioned. Only about those who committed some offences and obtained advantages, but about those who were entitled, that fines are not to be imposed in any case. Another question has been an interesting topic on compliance, whether it mitigating circumstance or not. I would like to draw the attention that the compliance is included into not linear things. If infringement is not evident, what has been criticized because of the presence of the compliance, this mitigating circumstance probably not manifested too much care. But if the provision, but the presence of the compliance, the compliance only just confirms this, maybe just aggravating. I wouldn't be too quick to include it into mitigating circumstances. It should be assessed depending on the situation. As for, in principle, probably that's all. I only just sorry that I was not able to much a chance to present it in a more detailed picture, but yes, I would like to support the ideas in this regard, as well as to provide support to the open discussion of this document. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Very briefly, in our presentation, we indicated that for the support of the legal certainty, it is proposed to substitute some provisions in paragraph 3 of the article, because if the resolution of the committee will be based on the substitution present, and it will be explained as explanation, there will be court proceedings, then probably that will relate to the issue of uncertainty. Probably it deserves to have a discussion. I agree with you that we need to make it by 100%. It's necessary. It has been a proposal for consideration. And as for the principle of the proportionality, the remark related to the wording, because it is stated here, I didn't mention the proportionality. I support that if there is a more convenient wording we should use, this principle of sound-mindedness, proportional, we should trade a place in them, whether under the principle of the lawfulness or another way, but not to lose this detailization, which is very important. That's what I wanted to underline. Not against it, but vice versa, in support. How to combine these two things. Thanks, Silver. Do you have a comment or later? Later. Then the floor is given to Alexander Vasilyevich Bez. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Thank you for that you have sent me an invitation for the event. Thank you that I have heard foreign experts on this matter. In my remarks, I would like to draw the attention to item 4 of the methodological recommendation, where it reads about the principles of applying fines. With great pleasure, I have heard the presentation of honored Mr. Rasen Dampel, who does draw attention to 3 principles in applying laws on economic competition. First, whether in what way fines will facilitate the competitive environment in future. First, as means of curbing of, and third, institution does restitution ways to persons who experience losses. But this the institute of responsibility is the punitive function. Second function, that's the institution function, and third function is the compensatory function. I would like to point out that implementation of this function just requires its own mechanisms of application, which is the institute of responsibility. The second version, which has been provided by honored Sylvain Lefranc, as for that the European Commission has provided some discretion powers, as it is actually happened in our country, according to Article 52 of the law on the protection of the. But from his remarks, I understand that first, each case is only individual that can be revised by court by applying the other provisions of the laws in effect, including such principle as the principle of the sound mindedness and substantiation and other principles that have been instituted by relevant legislative acts of the European law, and relevant fines in respect of any court that may be decreased. In our country, it isn't possible. In our situation, the court verifies whether the case has been a reality, and whether it complies with the provisions of the law, and just whether this resolution made just complies with the legislation of Ukraine. Having the opportunity of the presence of the Mrs. People's Deputy, well, what can we do about? How can we change the present laws by making more details to that? The second remark will relate to the technical component. I would like to say that fine is such as a law norm, as by its essence and by form, it has been established by relevant provision of the law. At present, I don't know, we're discussing approaches to applying the responsibility. Can we explain approaches actually by the subject matter? It's not explanation of on the application of Article 52, it's the discussion of approaches to applying relevant means of responsibility provided under the law, which the AMSU cannot change through any legislation. Introducing such a category as a fine is beyond the scopes of the powers of the MCU and contradicts Article 52 itself. When, as a practitioner lawyer, would like to slow down any case, then I would right away, after passing a resolution, according to this explanation, would appeal such explanation on the whole, as such that introduce legal categories that are not provided by the laws, I mean by the law of Ukraine on protection of in particular Article 52, does allegedly to the explanations on which relevant fines are to be applied. Therefore, in my opinion, it will be reasonable not to restrict powers of the Anti-Monopoly Committee of Ukraine, and I would like to point out that the conditions of the market in different industries are different from well-established competition to monopoly, which even provides for the use of punitive fines. You cannot just establish for all industries and of the economy or the sectors of the economy all just flat fund. Probably we need to devise some methodological recommendation under which to develop some criteria and what objectives are government agents to withstand in cases as it is specified in Article 4 of this recommendation, and to supplement these explanations, which are like the criteria of Mr. Damstov. As for the influence, I would like to point out that based on annual reports of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, huge amounts of sums are indicated, but when in the report how much has been got by the state, these indicators are not matched well. But imposing fines by the NAMC, the company is simply disappearing. They do not pay fines, but as a result of that, such application of the current laws makes only damage. Understand, the Soviet tradition is based on a punitive function, based on responsibility, and as for the application, it's easier. So it is 30% and or 45%. It is the reason I applied it. What will happen after I apply it? Then It doesn't touch to me. Therefore, it's a wrongful approach, and I think the Anti-Monopoly Committee should be basing its activity on functional approaches to ensure competition. Because each annual report of the MCU, the previous convocation, starts with that. Just to what extent the monopolization in the economic sector is increased, and step over to the work, because the fines provided by Article 52 is too wide. It provides too huge powers, and what you use these powers is dependent on the leadership and on the tasks put by the MCU and by the leadership of the country. Thanks a lot for your comment. And now, just a couple of minutes, Vasil Dmitrovich Lagutin would like to speak. Thanks a lot for this opportunity to speak, Professor Lagutin, Doctor of Economic Sciences. And from the scholar world, a few words, of course. This document looks rather solid. In view of the methodology of shaping this document, particularly, there are no particular claims to it. However, there are certain problems. Right away, it is in the eyes that it's mostly a document of legal character. Too little of economy is in it. But in the first part, in the first section of our discussion, we have reached the level of discussing the economic. Of course, we cannot deal without assessing the economy, defining what is the proceeds or profit without what are the economic losses because of some infringements, for what is the negative impact for the society in particular place in the market. It's difficult to determine, but we need to aspire to that and to put into the basis how to specify fines. In my opinion, just a bit unnatural. How these percentage points have been defined. Another aspect, relevance of the markets. As far as I understood, even item 8.2.2, two markets are singled out. Markets in which infringements have been committed, and markets in which are influenced by these extremely. It's difficult to define what are relevant markets. It's a durative problem. How to resolve it? Probably we should have some data bank, some database about some markets. Then the problem of the part of the fine in the turnover. The first deputy had said 2/3 of the basic. In my opinion, this is the contradiction between the definition of this percentage, between the fiscal character of a fine, probably by its in stimulating. Why 2/3? Why not 50? There will be more incentive effect. Because it's most important not to take a fine. Moreover, as has been mentioned, it is paid not badly, but mostly to encourage the development of their competitive environment. Therefore, 2/3. As for this, there is a question why it is. Item 16, the final one. Probably it should be reworded, edited, because it becomes the principal one in this document. Or what we have discussed may not be used. It requires addition. Yet another question: whether the gravity of the infringement is dependent on the socio-economic importance of the market, on the priority of the market. Frankly speaking, I don't know, because the market of the linens in a railway car market, but the gasoline market is very important. Probably we should think about it. On the whole, just to speak it in a bureaucratic way, this document might be taken as a basis. Thank you. Are there any comments or remarks? Mrs. Senchina, you're welcome. Thanks a lot. Indeed, very interesting was to hear many interesting proposals and ideas, probably on my own behalf and from the business community, which I represent in the person of the American Commerce Chamber. All ideas related to not to give the legal fact to this document, item 16, which debates this. The idea is that the development of this document should not have the legal status, as contradicts Article 52 and something other. These all ideas, all this simply neutralize all intentions in about developing. I would like to recall just with what the development document has been linked. As present, the anti-monopoly law has not been developing. Why? Because the anti-monopoly committee has been all this a thing in itself. This is an authority that made decisions, revised itself, and with that, all the anti-monopoly practice was all. Let's be frank. If we want to change this situation, that we in any case should have a document which you might just have in your head when you plead to court. Well, but having this item 16 in the explanations, we won't go to court. But then the court says it will say that, sorry, it's not that document, I have Article 52. We confronted it. Many cases which are already in judicial practice. Therefore, I would like us to start from the basic theme and then to move further into the specificities. We're in favor of that, for the document to have some legal mandatory force. At which stage should it be in several months? I would like to point out that what you wouldn't give it a legal status now, I don't think that will save that decisions might be made as a bypass of this document. But if you pass this document as recommendations for yourself, you say that you will apply that but that there are cases that you won't use these recommendations, that's already a doubt. Therefore, given a legal status to this document will make only a positive impact, irrespective that it is not a perfect one. Might be discussions on its character, and we make. But this document should be tested also through attracting independent judiciary bodies. On the whole, we are glad that on the whole this discussion is going on, because I would like to remind that for many years we even couldn't that we would like to devise such a methodology. The previous composition of the committee curtailed any discussions in this regard. The fact that the document is available of such a level with which we might organize discussions, but this level is rather high in its development. It's a positive thing. And a couple of words I would like to speak about the remarks that have been just made here with respect, for example, the exclusive nature, the exclusive list of the segments. We would like to have this the precise list of exclusions. Mr. Silver corroborated that we supported in present Ukrainian law applying practice. Discretion which the anti-MSU has at the moment should remain in some curtailed volume, just as it is the part of the anti-monopoly law as such. On the whole, that methodology which you see at the moment, at each stage of forming the fines, we provide for some level of discretion. We think it is sufficient to ensure the matching of the resolution to the circumstances of a case. And as for item 16, I want to be excluded from this wording, as it neutralizes all the idea of these recommendations. And as for the subjective side mentioned under item 6 of recommendation, I agree that probably it'll be premature mechanism. It indeed contradicts the nature of the legal responsibility for infringing the anti-monopoly law. Probably it's a theoretical question more in character, how to devise legislation as in the Anglo-Saxon system, but it's probably a pre-timely question. I would like also to speak in favor that the compliance program should be one of the mitigating circumstances, because I support the Igor's standpoint who presented at the roundabout. We put two jars of the weights. Positive effect of this provision if included into the recommendatory explanations, and a negative effect, as Alexander Leonidovich mentioned, and in some cases it may be an aggravating circumstance. A positive effect that this provision will appear is quite higher, in our opinion, than a negative effect. Why? Because if this provision will be included, it will be a powerful incentive for the business community to develop compliance programs in the field of compliance with their anti-monopoly laws. In our opinion, it's might be a very important accomplishment in this regulation. And in defense of the position mentioned with other lineage that with regards that principle should be detailed, it seems to us that any detailization, the deeper is better in the level of each legal document is a positive thing for sure. In the absence of the proper practice in courts, it should be in place. Thank you. Thank you.
And short comment from me. Thank you for all the comments provided, and the red thread here. The best is the enemy of the good. And if we are talking that we would like to develop really ideal, perfect document that will be perfect operationally, so we are working 2 months. Not all of us, definitely, and to take responsibility and say that's the exhausting manager, all the exhausting list of all the circumstances that it's carved in stone, the mechanism, how to calculate the relevant market. And we have a lot of people here at this table, and everybody's having own opinion how to figure out and calculate this relevant market. And you're absolutely right and to the point when you say that anti-monopoly law as a practice was not developing because it was closed kind of legislation. And we need kind of cases to be developed, should be public, made public. And for sure, we are not afraid. We are not scared that any document that defines the methodology of sanctions, it can be mandatory, but then the issue arises when it can be done. And the quality level should be such a quality that it should be like carved in stone. And my personal feelings that May 19 next year, it will be 1 year since Parliament have appointed me. So at least 1 year of practical application have to be. We are reviewing the cases. For example, we have still cases as of in our department 2010, 2011, 30, 40 cases. And these cases are entirely different and in circumstances and importance and whatever. At the previous committee, we were looking at concrete and specific case when there is misuse of monopoly status and 300,000 hryvnia were charged. But then the company is the monopoly and proceeds they have in billions. And to find the proper balance, really, it's very important that this is 300,000, but it's kind of just systematic and whatever, how systematic it is. And when we apply sanction, it's not like 1,250,000 something, but it should be having an impact, that rehabilitation kind of, and definitely prohibitive impact as well, and deterring impact as well. We are in favor of transparency. We are not afraid of this. But the quality of the document, if we are taking the obligation that we are going to follow and work with this, we need some more time to practice it in real life. This does not mean that we are not willing that in 6 months and 1 year to have mandatory document. But all the time, in any situation, you can find and you can strike the proper balance. And the bottom line of item 16, it's more about the circumstances that it's hard even for us to imagine what can occur, what can happen to adequately apply sanctions in the concrete and specific situation. And basically, the more practical experience we have, the more detailed practice we'll have with respect to the document, will reduce our discretion. But the most important issue, and to me personally as well, as a person that I was not involved all the time in calculation of relevant markets. When we are talking about the basis and percentage from the basis points, and then the point is about how we figure out and calculate this relevant basis. There is a market infringement happened, and we discuss a lot, and we have discussed a lot about this, and yesterday and last week, and I think this is subject matter number one, and we'll try to make it more clear. And with respect to item 16, I just wanted to support this. This requires discussion. But with respect to legal status of the document, I just want to defend the line of Anti-Monopoly Committee. In this case, this will be hard to adopt it. And then Anti-Monopoly Committee, that they have some time limits, including to European partners, and it impacts the economic policy, and there are lots of questions to you, Lena, about compliance. Why you consider compliance? Actually, I heard about compliance programs as this is making it more serious non-compliance. When I am within compliance program and then direct participation in bidding, I should not communicate with my competitive bidder, and these are already violations and non-compliance, and I have signed that I'm not going to negotiate with competitive bidder, and that's my responsibility. And I was sober enough and rational enough, and I have infringed my own behavior, and compliance programs confirm this really, and that's why I think that's the factor that makes it worse, and the fact that this is mitigating factor. That's from practice of other countries. When we are talking about anti-corruption legislation, there is close concept in UK, Anti-Bribery Act, and it is specified because the liability is not a natural person but a legal entity. And the compliance program availability confirms that a legal entity tried to do its best to prevent non-compliance. In case non-compliance happened and occurred, it's due to non-compliance of some specific employee, sales manager, for example, or whatever. This should be mitigating factor. That's the logic behind it, as a mitigating factor, not a factor that makes it aggravating. And that's not an absolute, because in case investigation proves that despite all the compliance and blah 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 and all the preventive measures and legal entity all the way to decision maker, CEO, CFO, everybody confirmed that this non-compliance happened and the whole chain was aware, that's not any mitigating factor, it's an aggravating factor. That's the aggravating factor. But that's why in the respective countries they have the competition agency measure. In addition to the sanction, the company should make sure that compliance program within the company should be monitored and updated and whatever. But the fact that this norm is in the law, that's a positive for compliance culture, because when we are talking in a straightforward way, that in most of the companies they have no clue what this competition law is about and anti-monopoly compliance, what it's all about. You want to say something? Yeah? Я скажу тільки одне слово.
Way, because it's very easy to print up a piece of paper and say, now we have a compliance program, but the very fact that there has been a violation is really proof that it didn't work. So we tend not to give companies any credit for a compliance program in that situation. Nice of them to have it, but we're not going to take it into account.
Спасибо большое.
We have very limited time and there is one topic for discussion, and it's good to discuss, and the argument is make it better, but maybe we'll have entirely new document developed from scratch, something like that. Yeah. And 2 minutes each, not more. I'm not going to repeat whatever, not going to duplicate. Definitely Anti-Monopoly Committee needs this document, but 2 issues have not been discussed yet. There is a mention in here, taking into account the circumstances, like mitigating factor, depending from the authorities, it can be dependent from anything, kind of, from monopoly company, from the owner of certain necessary resource. It should not be only about authorities. In case a legal entity or enterprise is forced or losing business, that's a mitigating factor. And one more issue about time period for suing in court, and definitely when we are talking about illegal proceeds, if we are interpreting it, you see, when there is still non-compliance, there is no limit. But then the fact that year number 4, you can do it. You can have illegal proceeds. We have to clarify this, because I remember from Federal Trade Commission, they have identified vitamin cartel that operated for 17 years, and sanction was $1 billion. So for 17 years, they were profiteering from consumers. So we need to clarify this kind of period of time to sue this or to apply this law. Because when we identify that this cartel exists for years and years, they have to be scared of this. And 10% still remains, but artificial constraints and limitations should not be introduced. Institute of Private Law, National Academy of Science of legal sciences. I would like to agree with Anti-Monopoly Committee. I just wanted to say there are lots of discussions about organizational and legal issues and discussed simultaneously, but there are lots of economic and organizational issues. We are trying to put it in the same document. It's kind of mission impossible to do it in one document. Maybe we need to develop certain internal methodological recommendations, and then eventually you will see how effective and efficient it is. Because we'll find some lawyers when you will make it mandatory legally. They'll block lots of issues. And one more comment, and then Elena Zaharnik, legal firm, DLA Piper, and for business community to balance the feedback to Anti-Monopoly Committee. My consideration is this recommendations are pretty good, because the objective from the very beginning to make it transparent and clear and straightforward in solving this issue. But let's have a look. The draft that have to be approved in 1 week, we are not fully aware what will happen because we don't have the figures. In case we'll make it mandatory, and as it is already confirmed by the practice, in some cases decisions are going to be entirely inadequate. In case it will be approved in the Ministry of Justice, you won't be able to change anything, and business community won't get the right results, but they'll get shocking results. The sanction about what? About concentration. That's pretty obvious, and we have to look in depth. I want to misuse monopoly status when infringement happened, and entirely different ball game when you are getting permission for concentration. This is non-compliance with the procedure. Even it ended with monopoly. Monopoly status is not the infringement. But when monopoly have been established and misuse of the provisions and misuse with these limits, and about concentration, really, this issue have to be solved with the changes in the threshold amounts, because whatever we are doing right now, it has very little to do with the real control. It's pretty formal procedure with pretty doubtful efficiency. So definitely we need to upgrade and change the threshold amounts. It should be hand in hand with the control of the concentration, because concentration is one of the principles of the competition law. That's really very much important and to the point, but we need to change the basic conditions for it. Alexander Ivanovich. I have to respond, guys, to these comments, because the accomplishing the monopoly status by having competitive competition, that's not forbidden, it's legal. But in case you are violating procedural requirement and you are getting monopoly, that's same as cartel. That's no difference, because a hidden concentration can happen when two offshore companies have exchanged some documents and nobody is aware about it in Ukraine. So as a result, monopoly in the market and no difference with cartel. Same negative impact. Can I ask you a question? The Anti-Monopoly Committee, we understand pretty well it's not ideal. No way it can be ideal. That's the first document. What is the procedure and how often you are planning or you see it as changes in the documents are introduced? So based on efficiency, despite the fact this document have not been approved the last 3 weeks. We calculate sanctions on the basis of this methodology. And when we see some discrepancy in the wordings, we are trying to clarify certain issues. So for sure, we need to make like a full stop. You see, the best is the enemy of the good. The perfect is the enemy of the good. So we need to fix it at certain point as final version. And then my opinion, to use it for about 6 months, and as a result of this 6-month experience, to make it quality document, because this document is really upgraded on weekly basis. On weekly basis, we are clarifying certain issues. So let's figure it out for ourselves. You understand certain version, you fix it, you understand it, and then when you will upgrade it, we'll publish it. Yeah, for sure. Dear participants of this roundtable discussion, first of all, on behalf of Competition Fund, I am very happy with the development of the discussion. Unless Sergei Ivanovich will stop it at a certain point, it will never end. It will be a never-ending story. And why? Actually, this competition discussion provided possibility for us to discuss it, because we understand pretty well that when criticize and trying to criticize Anti-Monopoly Committee for drafting this document, but we need to take into account a couple of issues. Committee is only in this with these authorities, with these top managers, only 100 days they are working. And they already opened up a lot of details about their operations. Definitely they are developing their approaches in a public way, in a public manner, and this was emphasized today. We would like to wish them to try to stick to this public way of discussing, listen to the market participants. As a person who worked for years in the committee, taking part in the competition decisions, and you can check it in the archives. And for 2 years I was acting as head of the committee, and I worked in court and lots of verdicts and a lot of civil kind of verdicts and decisions adopted in court. And that's a huge responsibility to the Anti-Monopoly Committee and anti-monopoly officials. It will be substantial burden, and they will have much more gray hair as well. And they need to take into account only the issues that we have discussed here. I am talking to Professor Lagutin, but there are economic circumstances in the decision making. And Hassan was and Russell, Dumford, and they were mentioning these issues, and to put it on paper within 100 days and demanding from the Anti-Monopoly Committee to make it perfect. This is not really possible, and we try to advise the committee in a correct manner what we can adjust and amend and change, not to get into legal trouble, in legal disputes in courts. To my mind, my experience, they are moving in the right direction. First, they need to develop some document that committee can adjust it. In case we'll draft the law and pass it in the parliament, in the Rada, it will be very much difficult, believe me. We adopted dozens of pieces of legislation in the parliament. We know how difficult it is, and they are moving in the right direction. With respect to saying that this never happened in the history of the committee. But I'll disclose you one. There were two documents for like bylaws adopted in the Anti-Monopoly Committee. That's about economic concentration document and local bylaws of the Anti-Monopoly Committee on the Article 52. So they are applying it, and we expect them to do it. But I just wanted to ask the businesses, dear colleagues, why in courts we don't have any disputes with respect to Article 55 on economic competition that requires double reimbursement for infringing anti-competition law. We were very proud that we managed to change the opinion of the lawyers in the present administration, parliament, cabinet of ministers, and they were asking how you managed to get this provision. And we are talking about EU experience and US experience, and even higher amounts are there. But in Ukraine, this is not applied. I am asking big business, why you are not complaining about it? Why you are not sharing with the major companies that this can be applied? And you go to court and prove that there is some misuse of anti-monopoly legislation. And plus experts have to be attracted, and this process does not work in Ukraine. So that's wrong. And at the very end, I just wanted to mention that we can provide our forum in case you will need at any time. And thank you very much for this very much in-depth discussion. Thank you one more time. Thank you. And now we start the second part of our session about publishing Anti-Monopoly Committee decisions. I just wanted to ask Anna Artemenko, floor is yours. Really publishing decisions of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, it's no less important than recommendations about the sanctions and penalties. First of all, about transparency and predictability, and as well the highest number of complaints about the previous authorities in Anti-Monopoly Committee about non-transparency and no publications of Anti-Monopoly Committee decisions. So the law firms and public, they are not aware about the approaches. They have no possibility to get it, what have been adopted and whatever. Sergey, can you do this for me? It's probably about slides. And the issue on publishing the decisions of Anti-Monopoly Committee, that's our obligation in accordance with EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, and the law that requires committee to publish all the decisions have not been approved yet in the parliament. And about 1.5 months, the decisions have been adopted without expecting the law adopted in the parliament. Publications have to be started, and publications have to perform the major functions that were specified above. And as of today, more than 1 month of practical application of this publishing of the AMCU decisions, we can see what problems arise. The most sensitive issue when we are talking about publications, the permits for concentrations. When we are getting appeals with respect to identifying all the information as not for disclosure information, and applicants provide absolutely no information why this information is confidential or not for disclosure. That may damage the interests of commercial entity. And you can get these publications on the website. The company A is planning to buy shares of company B. Nothing about approaches of the committee, all the way to the situation that not for disclosure are even types of operations, types of activities, and types of concentration. That's not for disclosure or information. And then about applying sanctions for infringement. Situation is even worse because the applicants are actually requiring to make it not public. Even adopting decision by the committee that this company A is liable. No arguments about it. And about publication may damage the interests of the companies. And as a result, publishing decisions with respect to application of sanctions never happens.
Legal grounds on publication decisions. I would like, just in view of the recent amendments just to the law on the access to the public information, the Article 6 provides just the restriction in the access to information while complying with 3 requirements, which will be taken into account while making subsequent decision on a publication. An important provision is in this article of the law, which says that the restriction to access is just sent to the information, but not to the document itself. As the committee presently sees such an issue, that we have agreed to comply with this function, but it doesn't perform the main function of such a publication, because it's of conventional character. We don't have the opportunity as of today to step beyond these borders, but the law on the access to the public information and the legislation on information just defines a mechanism according to which entities should provide information why conventional information is not for disclosure, but in what particular damage will be caused to the interests. Recognizing such problems that we have, it's in the plans of the committee to resolve issues how to disclose information in this particular case. Therefore, if there are no arguments why particularly this specific information is to be classified, the committee would be obliged to publish it in view of provisions of Article 6 of the law. In what way? From the point of view of the legislation, how these approaches are to be defined in future, probably as a part of compliance programs of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, or probably a template will be created with regards to information that cannot be specified as a classified information. Basically, this issue is in discussion the Anti-Monopoly Committee, and probably there will be some public comments, including how to categorize information into 3 types. The information access to which cannot be restricted. State information is specified during consultation, and information which is not subject to disclosure, because certainly we understand the huge massive of the commercial information, including information that is used for providing permits for concentration because it can cause great damage to the stakeholders in the discussions. And as of today, we would like to apply representatives of the law firm communities, that those applications which already have been submitted to the committee, we would like to get from you additional arguments as for classifying information and specifying the information as information with restricted access, because we think that in near future this issue will be raised by the committee and will be decided in each particular case. In principle, that's all. Thanks a lot. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Russell Dumptop. Дуже дякую.
Overall question of transparency and procedural fairness. I'm not going to go into all of the details because of time, but to give you some ideas, and then I will focus in particular on the issues which Commissioner Artemenko raised. So why do we care about this? Procedural fairness and transparency it's not only fair to the parties, which is important, but it also leads to better results for us as an agency making these decisions. Our decisions are better informed. We are less likely to make a mistake by restricting good conduct that we want to see. And it makes sure that we are testing our ideas along the way so that we are not sort of going along by our own momentum. There's a lot of guidance out there on this by the ICN and to a lesser extent the OECD. Transparency can really appear in different levels. The agency standards and procedures at the investigative stage, the internal decision-making stage, at the adjudication stage, and at judicial review. It's particularly important to have the transparent procedures and standards. Not only the legislation and the rules and regulations, which I think everyone would agree with, and the agency's internal guidelines, which are transparent and posted on the internet, but in particular the explanation of the rationale for particular cases. And that really is the issue which we are talking about here. We have found that we are generally able to explain why we acted in a particular case in a way that does not reveal confidential information. And most of our decisions can say why we found that a particular sector is within the relevant market and which is not, without referencing the specific information. In unusual cases, there is some data which is confidential, and we then will have to black out a certain portion of it, which is then published on the publicly, and the confidential version is available for the courts to review. But that is a very small fraction of the information, and you can look at the two side by side, and there's not a lot of difference between the two. These standards are important for us then promoting what our standards are and what our procedures are and how we decide things in cases so firms can conform their conduct to it. And most firms want to do exactly that. So the way we do that is we have our top officials, our chairman make speeches. We put all of the records of cases on our website on the left. We have guidances were published, and even lower officials sometimes go out and make speeches like that guy in the lower left. At the investigative stage, one thing which I put at the bottom here is we want to confront the myth of secrecy. The idea that rationale must be kept within the agency. So there was a scene from a movie. I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. That's not the way we want to do it. We want to tell you everything, tell the public everything we can. One point in engaging with the parties, we have a regular dialogue with the parties to a case from the very beginning to the end. Phone calls with counsel every week, sometimes every day. We tell them from the very beginning what it is that's on our mind, what is it that concerns us. Is it the relevant market? Is it whether entry is possible or not? And that way they can focus their arguments on what we're concerned about and not wasting their time and ours by providing information about things which we don't see as being a big issue. They may submit both oral arguments and written arguments to us at every stage of the agreement, and we will take them seriously. And these discussions help us focus our investigations. It lets us sharpen our own theory, and it lets us test our own theory. If we have an idea about what's a competitive concern and we hear what the other side is, it might make the concern go away. It certainly will tell us what the issue that we will have to face when we ultimately go to court. And then if we have a chance to test that, we won't be pursuing ideas that don't pan out in the end. Significantly, it also lets us focus our document requests so that firms are not producing documents which cost them money and we'll never have time to look at. Okay. So I want to move ahead to the protection of confidential information because we do have to both protect business and confidential information for the reasons which are stated. We have to respect the applicable privileges, such as attorney-client privileges, and yet at the same time, we have to be able to give firms the information they need so that they are able to respond to our concerns, both to us at the adjudicative stage and ultimately in court. And so we have procedures in place. We can issue protective orders, which says that we will disclose information to the firm's counsel so that they can defend themselves, but they are ordered not to disclose it further. When companies come to us and say this information is confidential, that's their assertion, but the agency ultimately makes the decision. We'll hear what they have to say, but they can't just put a blanket over everything and say, we can't tell you this. And this requires a certain amount of judgment that can then be appealed to they can go to court if they think we're really about to spill the beans, as they say, and they get notice of what's going to be kept confidential and what is not. Okay. And so I will move ahead to one of the, I guess, the question of adjudication here, because that is comes up when the agency itself makes the decision. We need to be carefully separating the investigative process from the adjudicatory process. When we are investigating, we're not, and then the agency itself will then decide. Well, then we stop communicating because we're not whispering behind their back as to what the outcome should be. It gets to the point that when we are at holiday parties, the staff investigating the case is in a different corner of the room for the commissioners because we respect it that carefully. There's right to presentation of evidence at every stage, representation by counsel, and we have to be careful that we are avoiding the perception that we are both the investigator, the judge, the jury, and the executioner, all wrapped into one. Okay, and I think that's the 7-minute version. The rest of it is available in the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ross. Thank you for your presentation. На закінчення я би також хотів надати можливість нашим іноземним експертам ще сказати декілька слів за результатами заходу. Closing remarks by international experts.
Are you on both sessions or on both sessions?
Both, yeah, just overall.
Well, I've learned many things today. I don't notice. And the fact is I've only read the first version of the draft. I haven't read the second version of the draft, so I understand there's some discussion about paragraph 16, but I haven't seen it. I was very interested by what Professor Lagutin meant. Now, obviously, we cannot dissociate competition law and competition economics. That will be bringing us back to the old 50s and the hardest ordo-liberal approach that we had then. But if my understanding is good, there's still some discussion about how the base of the amount of fine should be defined. And I have the feeling that Article 6 in the version that I've read is about, it isn't clear in my mind whether it's about sales or whether it is about benefits. And I have the feeling sometimes that what was trying to be achieved was to get an economic analysis of the fine, a fine that will be economically sound. Well, obviously, it's a very good goal, but I think the real aspects for economics is whether there has been an infringement. We need economics to ascertain a vertical restraint. We need economics to refuse, accept a merger to measure efficiency gains. When it comes to deciding, once an infringement has been determined, what is the right penalty? What should be the amount of the fines? I think it can only be used via proxies. Well, if it's an heavy infringement, and if this company's turnover is that amount, then we should be in that category. Trying to tune the fines to the economic advantage is, well, in my opinion, is quite difficult, hardly even possible. And it will end up to discussions about what has been the exact advantages or disadvantages, and I don't think it's really workable. I think there's the right place of using the economics in determining whether there is an infringement. When it comes to fines, then obviously it's more a question of proxies, of categorizing things. But maybe I haven't understood things properly, as we said. Now, moving on, the question of the briefly on the second session, which is access to information and making things as public as possible. Well, what has been said in relation to the practice in the United States is to a large extent also what we have in the European Union. I wouldn't go as far as to say that most decisions can be made public without modification. It is frequent in antitrust cases, in merger cases, that the public version is somehow black paint compared to the actual version. But it doesn't make any real difficulties because the information that are blackened are usually about the company's turnover or information about people who have been given the first information in the leniency proceedings. The legal aspects and are usually open to everyone. Now, the difficulty that we have, especially in the European Union, and I suspect it's something that will happen in the future in Ukraine as well, is confronting access to information and protection of leniency applicants. I mean, in cartel cases, a large portion of the information is coming from companies who are deciding to betray the brothers, if I may say so, in the sense that they know that they've been indulging into something which is not very nice, but if they're the first in the rat race, then they would get 100%. Obviously, for the companies, it will be a real problem with that. If access to information means that they won't get any fine, but they might be subject to huge damage claim in front of a national court. So there's a real discussion because the Commission has long tried to refuse to provide any information about leniency applicants, about information that are being provided with leniency applicants, because it wants to protect its leniency program. The General Court has disagreed in the past with the Commission and said you cannot just put forward the magic name of leniency application and refuse to provide documents. And you have to do on a case-by-case basis, and you have to really confront argument. Now, there's a new regulation coming, and basically it is trying to balance those conflicting interests, but that will deserve a topic of its own. The last thing I can say, and I want to be very brief, is we also have a lot of issues about protecting confidential information in the course of indiscretionary measures. When the Commission is having done rates in companies, or when it's asking for information, we have challenges against those decisions. Undertakings come in front of us and basically want us to annul a decision, an inspection decision, and usually they're asking to get access to information which the Commission is not yet forced to develop, and there has to be here as well kind of a balancing exercise. That basically what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hassan.
Thank you very much. One point I would like to add to what was said earlier about the setting up of fines is the need to emphasize proportionality. I think it's a guiding principle that regardless of the details that we discussed earlier about the discussion, to maintain the principle of proportionality and effectiveness in setting up the exercise. But also to emphasize that sanctions and decisions are taken by the anti-monopoly will be complemented through judicial review, that the parties will have possibility to appeal these decisions, which in turn, of course, depend on whether the courts are functioning well and whether the judiciary will be cooperating in this system. And I think this is something that perhaps also it's important to emphasize in our discussion. On the question of transparency, I keep on hearing an echo behind me.
You need to take it off.
That the antitrust analysis is becoming extremely complex, both in use of both legal and economic tools. And this complexity would require more and more transparency on the part of the agencies, because the more complex the tools, the more difficult it is for the party to know which analysis is being used and how decisions are being reached. So that itself would require more transparency in general, including in the cases of setting up guidelines and reaching decision on the appropriate and proportional fines for a particular case. Now the question is, how much transparency? I think transparency, it's good, it's very important, but it also brings costs, and it goes at the cost of inflexibility or lack of flexibility on the parts of the agencies, and it might actually lead to questioning of the legitimacy of the agencies, because the more the media and other parties question this decision publicly, the more it undermines the legal basis on which the agency will work out. So there are costs. So the implication of that is that you need that the optimum level of transparency will require some balancing act between how much openness and how much will be made, of course, respecting the need for legal certainty. Legal certainty is required for enforcing the law. My conclusion from that is I think it will be important, particularly for young agency, to emphasize transparency in the process of reaching decisions and less on details. Because the more details are, the less complicated and less open for discussion and issues. Now, what does this mean is that maybe in the process, if during the process, after these recommendations are out and it's emerged that there are areas where there is more need for transparency in that particular area, then the Anti-Monopoly Committee can provide more information and come out more clarification on that particular area, rather than go for a total transparency. The second, related to this issue, is that like all agencies, and some of the lessons that you could see, is that for agency to be effective, you need to continuously evaluate what are you doing, how are you doing it, is this the most effective way, and to revise this process. So if you're doing that, I think it also allows you need this flexibility for you to continually question yourself, whether internal evaluation or external evaluation, whether what you're doing is the right way. Are you moving with the market? Are you responding to the need for the work? And then the other way you can also remedy this lack of not 100% or transparency in the details is that you will need to publish decisions. And the motivation of decisions would be another way to provide more transparency as you go along in the process. And last but not least, as I said, that the parties still have a route for judicial review, which can be another way to provide check and balances in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hassan. Russ, do you have any additional comments as closing remarks? Piotr?
Thank you very much. I have just two short comments. First, about fines. I would say that we should meet in 6 months or even better in 12 months and talk about how does it work in practice, because it's the most important actually. And the second thought I had about the making decision public. Within my system in Poland, we have the internal obligation to make public a decision within 3 days after delivery to the company. And it is very often that companies don't inform the office exactly what they think is a confidential information. And of course, the public version should not include any business secret or any personal data. And it's actually on the office, it's the office responsibility to avoid revealing such an information. So it's very difficult for us, and we need to take care each time we're issuing a decision, and we make it public later on to check whether it doesn't include any secret information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to say, I'm really sorry that my colleagues from DG Competition could not be here today. They really wanted to, but it just clashed with other things in their calendars. I think we've obviously shared the paper with them, and I think we welcome this event and we welcome the paper. We provided some comments. I hope some of those have been useful. But I think we certainly see this as a step in the right direction. It's progress. Because I thought, there's been lots of discussion here, and I'm not a competition expert, so I'm not following it at all, but I see this is a document that will help in transparency and certainty, and that's what we're trying to achieve. Thank you for the second draft. It's at the moment still in Ukrainian, so I have not time to digest that, but hopefully there will be an English version at some stage, and we can see what comments, and also be happy to, before you publish, and I know your timetable is very, very tight, happy to feedback any comments from my competition colleagues before publication, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Юрій Олександрович, чи є якісь остаточні?
No, yes, I'm very grateful for the comments of all the international guests and of all the participants of this round table. It has been a lot said about penalties, about the way penalties are calculated. So basically, this topic there has been too much said on it, and I think now a lot needs to be done. Yeah. Still to make a document, if not perfect, but operating in the best way. Talking about transparency, basically everything which you have said is resonating well with our internal vision of this priority. What we are looking at transparency. Transparency can be looked at from two sides. Yeah, it's substantive, transparency, and formal transparency. So I think the formal element of transparency with regard to all the legal and regulatory limitations about publication of decisions. All these issues can be sorted out, can be resolved, and it is a matter of either establishing a process or clarifying some restrictions or limitations with other regulatory bodies in order to get clarity about what scope of information can be viewed as confidential, classified, things like that. But I think a bigger topic is substantive transparency. It's about how decisions are actually been made in the authority, and that the way they are made is transparent and is basically continuous and systematic. So in this regard, we are, I think that our intention to publish and to really regulate the way we determine penalties is the first step, but it should be cascaded, this whole approach should be cascaded down to all elements of our work, and at some point of time we will have something similar, maybe where possible, to like operating procedures for every particular maybe action, so that things like I don't know, unfair competition violation or decisions on specific maybe market assessment issues, they should be done on the basis of a very concrete algorithm in a consistent, similar, repeated way. And we would very much welcome maybe external assistance from you or maybe from Ukrainian lawyers with regard to determining these algorithm or checklists or procedures, how to assess every particular situation comprehensively and appropriately. So again, our transparency is really a priority of Anti-Monopoly Committee, and we are committed to it. So thank you very much.